writer by trade, and Dan's a best-selling author. So I immediately went to Amazon and typed in Dan Fitzgerald. By golly, that's impressive. All right. A shamanic medicine practitioner and a lifelong student of various spiritual practices and philosophies. He regularly volunteers as a teacher and a trail guide at Dallas Hill Nature Sanctuary and writes for the Conservationist magazine. That's the publication that the state parks puts out. Dan's ultimate vision is to help change the culture of how humans relate to and interact with the natural world. Very impressive, Dan. Take it over. One more announcement. We have a Zoom audience, and for them to hear questions from the audience, you need to be talking into something that looks like this. If you have one of the microphones with a stand, just press the button at the bottom, and the red light will turn green. And then, very important, remember to press it again and turn the green light to red. Otherwise, all your conversations will last all over the internet. Okay.
May I have the microphone, sir?
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, thanks for bringing me in. It is great to be in a crew that is so enthusiastic about such an important thing. So, we're all on the same page, which is fantastic. That's rare in this day and age. I put my contact information up here because this is the very first time I've done this particular talk. So if you have feedback or suggestions or complaints, send it to that address. As Richard mentioned, I am not an expert on anything. I am just an amateur. I'm not a professor or a professional in the natural world. I'm just a guy who loves this stuff, and I enjoy talking about it. And people say I'm a good teacher. So this is what you got today. Thank you. So if you like what you hear and you enjoy the experience, then I will take full credit for being an excellent presenter. And if you think it stinks, you can blame Paul Brill because this is all his idea. Humans. Most of the people we know are humans. And one of the things that has made our species so exceptional is our advanced mind. We have highly developed intelligence and consciousness. But maybe not every human has highly developed intelligence. However, on the whole, our species has done well in that regard. We as humans can observe our surroundings and we can make decisions based on what we see and what is going on. We can remember things and we make our decisions about what has happened in the past, our memories. We can communicate with each other. We have all these senses for seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting.
I forgot to share the screen.
Oh, it's okay, no problem.
You're hearing me fine.
Okay, and you're sharing the screen. Humans also have a system where we know where we are in space. I can look around and I can see where I am in the room, and if I go sideways, I know where I am in space like that. So we have all of these, and as soon as Richard finishes sharing the screen, I will get my slide back up for the big announcement. We're going to wait for the big moment because it's a big one. The whole talk hinges on this, Richard. We're all counting on you.
It went back to the start.
That's fine.
You should be good. Okay, now we're good.
Cool. Oh, and the thing I forgot to talk about. See, this is why I need the slides, because I'm new at this particular talk. We're also social beings. We have relatives, and we have friends, and we help each other out. And the great news, what I want to talk about today is, guess what? Plants can do all of that. What? Everybody probably knows all that already. So I want to start with vision. Here's how humans see. Light comes in, and we have all these receptors, different kinds of receptors for different frequencies of light. We've got rods that measure photons for brightness and darkness. And then we've got 3 different receptors for different frequencies of light. Plants have this too, but they have more, actually. Plants and birds also have receptors for UV light. So plants and birds and insects and mammals can all see based on what kinds of light are coming in to their receptors. So plants have receptors, and in the late 1800s, in 1880, a fellow named Charles Darwin and his son Francis, kind of smart guys, ran some experiments here to see if they could figure out how plants grow into light. We've all witnessed that, right? Plants reach. So, like any good scientist, he did these experiments with a control plant, and then he cut the tip off, and then he covered the tip, and then he did a transparent thing on the tip, and then he covered the base. So most of the bases are covered from the scientific experiment. And as you can see from this picture, when the tip can see the light, that's when the plant bends towards the sun. This was confirmed and expanded a little bit by a fellow named Peter Boysen Jensen from Denmark. And then in the 1920s, we figured out there's a hormone in plants that's called auxin. You may know about this. And basically it regulates cell growth in plants. Photoreceptors in plants, like I was talking about a second ago. What happened to my cheat sheet, Richard? Did you take it? Thanks. I need my notes here because I'm new. So, the term phototropism, it means growing towards the light. So these photoreceptors that the plants have, there's a bunch of different kinds, and it's kind of complicated. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it too much. But they've got fancy pants names like phototropins and phytochromes and cryptochromes and all these neat sounding receptors. But there's over a dozen of them that we have identified, and their job is to pick up different kinds of light. And it gives clues and cues to the plant when it gets different kinds of light. These photoreceptors play a part in all these different things in seed germination and determining whether the plant's going to flower or not, growing into the light, phototropism. It triggers sunscreen production. I don't know if you know this or not, but the colors, the fall colors in trees and leaves, those are carotenoids and anthocyanins that are basically chemicals that the plant makes to protect itself from sun damage. It's sunscreen. Plants have circadian rhythms. When the plant notices that the different frequencies of light are changing one way or the other, it can know when it's nighttime and when it's daytime. In fact, one of the tricks that the nursery growers use to get flowers to bloom at Mother's Day and Valentine's Day is they play around with the light so that they fool the plant into thinking it's a different time of year than it is, so the flowers pop out. They do that with light. So all of these things come into play from just a light signal from the plant. That being said, I will pose the question, how does a tree know when to leaf out in the springtime? You would think, well, we just talked about light, so the tree figures out how long the days are, that should be it, right? However, it's a lot more complicated than that. One of the things that we are learning is that a plant's decisions have a lot of factors involved, kind of like a human deciding whether to buy a house or not. You have a lot of things to consider. Where is it? What's the payment going to be like? What's the maintenance going to be like on it? Insurance, what neighborhood is it in? All these decisions come into play, and our minds, juggle all of this kind of stuff to come up with a decision. And plants do the same thing when it comes to figuring out when it is time to leaf out. Here's a bunch of switches. You might want to write these down if you're a nerd, because this is kind of cool. So the first thing that the plant does is it decides how long it has been cold. You will notice, if you observe plants, that even if we get a warm streak in January, the trees are not fooled, the plants are not fooled. The reason that they are not is because they are basically accumulating cold days in their, I'm going to call it nervous system, even though they don't have a nervous system. And in order for the plant to know that it is safe to spend the energy to leaf out and flower, there has to be an adequate amount of cold, so it knows that winter is almost over. After it passes that test, it goes to the warmth test. Has it been warm enough for long enough? There are warmer days start to stimulate certain hormones and enzymes in plants, and when we get a cold snap in March or April, that quells that hormone production until it warms up again, and then it starts up again. And so all of these warm days add up. The plant also decides and senses how long are the nights. That's how it measures daylight. We thought at first it was measuring light instead of dark, but it turns out it keeps track of how dark it is and for how long. So as the days get longer and the nights get shorter, that signaling system works in that regard. And then there's a bunch of other complicated stuff that comes into play too, like how much starch is stored, and the plant measures the viscosity of the sap in the xylem and makes sure that it's thawed enough to proceed. But for the most part, it's this enormous checklist of decision making that all gets juggled until the plant decides, this is where we go. I thought that was pretty neat. If plants can keep track of all of this, they must be able to count. Dr. Hitt,
Yes.
do me a favor and count to 5 out loud for me, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Fantastic. You pass.
All right.
Richard used to be a math professor. That's why I called on him, because I knew that he knew the answer. So, if plants can, plants count and remember how many of these cold days, how many of these warm days, how the light compares and all of that. If plants can remember or can count, then they must have some kind of memory. Because the reason Richard could count to 5 is because he knew the number system, he had memorized it. He said a number, and then when he got to the next number, he knew what number he had just said. And then he knows what number comes after that. That's a working memory. And our human brains have neurons that have those systems set up. Plants have a similar system. It doesn't work on neurons. They don't have a brain and a spinal cord and nervous system like we have, but they do have a system for recording this stuff just like humans. And to me, this is super fascinating. Here's a couple examples of plant memory. Most people are familiar with Mimosa pudica. This is the sensitive plant. That's where when you touch the leaves, they will fold up like that. So the cool thing about the plant's memory is that it learns in a short period of time whether a touch is dangerous or not. So you can touch the plant that folds up, and it unfolds, you touch it again, it folds up, and then it starts to I don't have to worry about this guy so much. And so the plant learns that this is not a threat. And that lasts for 20 or 30 minutes. And it turns out that that system works on physical touch from creatures. They experimented with it with water drops, same thing. It also works with dropping the plant. If you drop it from a height, it'll close up until it learns, oh, nothing bad happens when I do this. It's like bungee, it's kind of fun. So the plants learn because they remember what has happened in the past. One of my favorites is the Venus flytrap. Everybody knows that, right? Somebody was just talking to me earlier about Little Shop of Horrors and the Venus flytrap there. So the Venus flytrap, as you probably know, is a carnivorous plant. It basically eats insects for its nutrients. But the plant has evolved to recognize when it is worth the energy to close up. So it requires 2 trigger hair stimulations within 20 seconds. If something blows by in the wind, or if an insect lands and then comes off right away, the plant does not spend the energy to close. It has learned over time that it needs 2 back-to-back touches to guarantee that there is something worth expending the energy to close up. And then another cool thing about that specific plant is that it'll only stay closed if it has 5, scientists have figured out, it takes 5 triggers from the inside to make sure that the insect is still contained before it'll take the energy to start secreting the digestive enzymes. So that is a smart plant. That is a lot of decision making right there. Longer term decision making, you are probably familiar with stratification and vernalization as botany fans, but basically these are events or situations that the plant has to go through to accumulate a memory of wintertime and cold in order to know it is okay to germinate or to pop flowers out. So those are some nerdy terms for another version of plant memory. I find that all fascinating. Any questions about that? How is this from a detail standpoint? Am I boring you guys, or is it okay? I see some nods. That's all right. I don't know if you guys are all professors. I probably shouldn't be talking. Somebody's like, yeah, you shouldn't be talking no matter what you do. So I'm going to move on to a different sense. This is hearing. Here's how humans hear. Air comes in the ear, and it vibrates that little eardrum, and it vibrates the bones, and that little stapes bone puts percussion on this thing called the cochlea, which stimulates nerves, auditory and vestibular nerves, and that signal goes into our brain, and our advanced, highly intelligent, conscious brain interprets that as sound. Ba-boom. Plants can kind of do the same thing. They don't have the same equipment that we have, but they respond to sound and vibration. Some of the really neat examples of this are that roots have been shown to be able to sense the vibration of running water, and they will grow towards that specific area as opposed to randomly growing. There is also some crazy species-specific hearing. I'm going to use the term hearing, even though the botanists complain when I do that, because it's not really hearing, it's mechano-sensing acoustically. So if you want to split hairs, please forgive me, I'm going to use the term hearing for our purposes here. There are plants that can specifically recognize the sound of a specific species of pollinator. And when it recognizes that sound from that specific species, then it will do something, either release the pollen, or in the case of the evening primrose here in Tennessee, it actually sweetens the nectar by a large amount, like 20%. It puts the energy of this extra nectar production into the fact that that's the right kind of bee for my flower. And it doesn't work with other species of buzzing, but it does work with recordings. So in Tel Aviv, a few years back, they did some research, and they found out that the flower petals are some of the primary acoustic receivers. The flower petals act almost like our eardrums do. So if they modified or they removed the flower petals, then the plant apparently could not hear nearly as well. So that's it. The petals of the flower are an important part of its hearing. Questions about that sense? All right. This is me breakdancing. Humans know where they are in space through this complicated feedback system. It's called proprioception. There's your dollar word for the day. If you go to a cocktail party and you want to sound smart, throw out proprioception. That'll earn you a drink. So basically, our nervous system combines visual and some sensory stuff around the body. For example, if I turn my head this way, I know that I'm sideways. And you guys know that I'm sideways by looking at me. But if I close my eyes, I still know I'm sideways, even though I can't see anything. So it's not just visual. You know, there are lots of things involved in our vestibular system. I'm not going to bore you with the details of that, how our nervous system responds. But it turns out, surprise, surprise, plants kind of do the same thing. Plants have this trait that we have termed gravitropism, or geotropism is another term for it. And gravitropism basically means growing in relation to gravity. So the smart people who study plant physiology have figured out that just like we have these little carbon crystals in our inner ear that start to move and stimulate different parts of the inner ear that helps us know where we are in space and whether we're tilted and whether we're up or down. Plants have the same basic system. They have these little structures that are called statoliths inside their tissues. And so when the plant turns sideways, the statoliths dump out just like our little crystals dump out. And that signals, guess what, our friendly oxygen production that starts to cause the plant to grow bigger on one side, and it straightens it out. So the plant, even though it starts out sideways, eventually starts to grow up again. And that's because of its gravity sensors called statoliths. Interestingly enough, scientists, because when we run experiments, we love to screw around with stuff and see what we can break. So they've done some experiments with either genetically modified the plant so that it can't produce the statoliths, or they shut off the receptors for it. And it turns out that a plant will struggle for a while not knowing where it is, but eventually it writes itself anyway and figures it out. So there's more to it than just this, but we don't know what it is. Well, I don't know what it is. Maybe Richard knows what it is. That's what I just talked about. More complicated than just oxen. Let's talk about touch, tactile stuff. We already touched on some of the mimosa and the Venus flytrap when we talked about memory. But you know, we as humans have all these fancy pants organs and sensors inside of our skin and tissues that sense things like hot and cold, or touch, or pain, or pressure. So we're very sensitive to what is being applied to our structure. Plants have a similar concept. They respond to touch based on, once again, they don't have the nervous system, but they have calcium signaling channels just like humans have, similar to humans have. And so their response to touch can go anywhere from nearly instantaneous, such as the Venus flytrap snapping shut, or the mimosa plant we talked about closing up in a second or so, all the way up to, here is my favorite word of this talk right here, oh my God, phagomorphogenesis. Thank you, Greeks. So that is the definition. The definition of that is basically growing and forming a shape according to being touched. There's your fancy word. There will be a spelling quiz later, by the way. So this can go on for the entire life of the plant. And a great example that I like to use, if you ever like to go hiking in the mountains like I do, you will find at the top of very windy mountainsides, if you look at the trees, you will see that all the branches, especially on the conifers, are growing on one side of the tree. And that's the downwind side. On the windward side of the tree, it's not put down any branches. And that's because of this mechanosensing that we're talking about. The tree starts to put out a little piece of growth, and the wind's banging into it, and the tree's like, I'm gonna do that, it's too much trouble. So it puts all of its branching on the not windy side. It's called flagging. I want to touch on communication because this is some of the most fascinating stuff we are learning about plants. Comparing humans to plant communication. So humans, we communicate primarily through two different methods. Number one is auditory. We have language. We talk to each other. Unless you're on Twitter and then you don't talk to each other. Visual is the other one. We have written language, we have nonverbal communication, so that is another way that we as humans have developed communication. Plants do not speak as far as we know, so they communicate through different methods. Plants communicate through pheromones, which is a scent-based communication system. They have chemical signaling, both in their own plant and underground. And they also have electrical signals, just like our nervous system. Plants do it a lot slower than we do, but if I stub my toe on this, it's milliseconds for that signal to go to my brain, and I know that I just hurt my toe. In plants, their electrical system goes about somewhere between 1 and 5 centimeters per second. So it's a lot slower, but the electrical signal still goes through the tissue. Well, who's on mycologist? Is that a king bolete? Looks yummy, doesn't it? So, some of the ways, the reason I put a fungus there is because so much of plant communication is based on fungi. We're going to talk about that shortly. Humans communicate person to person. We also communicate with other animals, such as the dog. And we also communicate with other humans across vast distances in our electronic network. Guess what? Plants do the same thing. They speak to each other, they speak to other animals, and they communicate in their network, which you probably have heard the phrase by now, the mycorrhizal network. That is the network of fungi underground that connects all the plants and really turns things into a system. This has been termed the Wood Wide Web. And yeah, if you haven't heard that term before, get used to it. It's becoming popular. We, as people who study this stuff, we think we kind of know how the tree does photosynthesis, how it does growth of wood and stuff like that. So everything from the ground up, and we think we got a pretty good sense of. However, down here, there's all kind of madness happening underground that we are just learning about. In the last 20 years or so, the study of what is going on with these mycorrhizal fungi has just exploded, and it's absolutely fascinating. We have found that plants will use the underground fungi network, their wood wide web, to redistribute nutrients, not only to their own species, but also to other species, to help each other out when one particular organism is struggling. There's a response coordination to different stresses. These plants will, for example, there was a study in China where they had some crops, corn crop, that was basically poisoned by cadmium. And so the plant went through its specific ways to try to mitigate that heavy metal poisoning. Well, it turns out that all the surrounding plants also turned on those same defenses, even though they had not been poisoned yet, because the plant that has trouble was putting out those warning signals, saying, hey, we got a problem in the soil. Put on your chemicals. Put on your helmet. It's time. Plants will always communicate, will also communicate water problems and shortages, and they will use the fungi network to help share water. Here's the thing that blows my mind most recently. The fungi in the Wood Wide Web have proven to be conversation mediators. They are basically listening to, you just picture the guys in the van with the headphones on. They are listening to these conversations that are passing back and forth between the plant, and they make decisions, the fungi make decisions as to whether they are going to pass this signal, or ignore this signal, or amplify it if it seems really important. And it turns out that the fungi have figured out that they ought to spend more time prioritizing the healthier, stronger plants than the weaker ones. So that as a concept, I mean, these fungi are not passive telephone lines. They are actively making decisions just like the plants are. Wow. Anybody want to ask a question? Yes. Push the little button and ask your question, please.
Can you hear me? For the communication, are they able to determine like if a plant is an invasive plant versus like a native plant?
When you say they, who are you referring to? The fungi?
The dudes with the...
The dudes with the headsets,
Yeah.
So the plants themselves make decisions about how they're going to do the sharing and the communication. In fact, in the forest, for example, Suzanne Seymour's work, and she's in Canada, she has shown that Douglas firs, as an example, will prioritize their own species when it comes to helping with water and nutrients. They'll dish out some to the other species like the oaks and the birches, but their own species gets the majority of the help. So, from what we can tell so far, the fungi's decisions are not necessarily based on species, but based on the health and the strength of the plant. So the fungi's are sort of compiling both the strength of the signals and also the number of them. So like if 25 small signals over here are saying the same thing, the fungi are like, maybe that's important. Whereas if there's one mother tree that puts her hand up and says, hey, listen to this, they're going to listen. Does that answer the question? Hans Willie.
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Almost.
Okay. I think there is a lot of mythology around fungi and trees. And the first one, the woman in Canada,
Yes.
she was the first one discovering these connections between trees and fungi.
Yes, I know what you're going to say. Hans is going to call me out on this. Go
In the
ahead.
meantime, it has the whole thing has become kind of mythology, what can be done, not be done. And a lot of research has been done which contradicts what the Canadian woman
Yes.
has found out. So we are in the middle of this research. That we have a fungal network which connects trees. This is a given, and this is amazing. And that is maybe only 30 years old, right? Maybe 20 years. But this whole field of research is still developing,
Yes.
and we cannot put too much emphasis on fungi are doing and deciding. Many people say they can't because they want to do symbiosis with the roots of trees, but they cannot decide which tree they channel photosynthesis products or whatever. So I would be very cautious.
Thank you, Hans. Yes.
to
Mr. Honegger is reminding us that some of Seymour's research that I was just talking about with the fungal network is under question. And we haven't really some of the experiments that Dr. Seymour had done have not really been able to be replicated well. So there are a lot of question marks. Please don't take any of this as like, we've got it all figured out and we know how this works, because we don't. We can say that about life too. I mean, we think we know something and, well, maybe not so much. So, any other questions about the topic at hand before we move on? I got something special for you guys too. Yes?
In fact, this might be more mythology.
Speak into the microphone, please, so the people online can hear you.
This might be more mythology too, but it seems like I heard somewhere a statistic about how far some of these messages can be carried through the fungal network. Do you know off the top of your
I
head?
have read some claims that can be like miles and miles. I don't know. You know, I don't think that we're ready to make a claim on distance like that. It's an excellent question, though. You know, if you think about it, all the soil has this mycorrhizal network that's all interconnected until it gets cut off by the Mississippi River. So like the whole eastern part of North America, in theory, has a connection. So we'll see, you know, maybe we'll see. What other questions? Yes, ma'am.
May I add something to?
Yes, Hans Willy, please.
The fungus kicks up photosynthesis products from a tree
Yes.
with which it has connections. Okay? And what it picks up is dissipating. Right? So when you can think about one tree and then fungus around the tree picks up all these photosynthesis products and transports that through its network, but it dissipates out. So
Find the tables,
the
it's
less you
great.
have. But now you have to consider that a tree is here, tree is here, tree is here. And all the fungi can connect to each other, so nobody can really tell what one tree contributes, how far that goes with. Because it can actually come from several trees and mix up.
Yeah, so what Mr. Honaker is saying is that we can't really measure specifically which contributions specific trees are making to the network. All we know is that the network as a whole is functioning to share nutrients and water and information. What we have figured out is that about 1/3 of trees' photosynthesis energy is transferred to the fungus to feed the fungus underground. It's about 1/3. And going back to what Hans was just saying, as far as the equilibrium of sharing, research has shown that in, for example, a beech forest that is undisturbed, all the trees are photosynthesizing at the same rate. The big ones, the little ones, the sick ones, the healthy ones. So that network is feeding everybody enough so that all boats are rising to the same level as far as their physiological processes. That is a commune at work, I suppose. We have another question, I'm sorry, yes. A lot of questions.
I'm not even
Hope I know
sure.
the answer.
I'm not even sure this is a question, and perhaps Willie has answered it, or and you. But I recently think I heard that, you know, I thought everybody was doing, I mean, the trees and fungi and all this, were doing this as a cooperative venture. And then what I think I heard, that really what is going on, the fungi are the ones thinking survival. So let's keep feeding, working with the trees for our own survival. So that gave a different slant to it somewhat, because I love the idea of trees supporting each other and everything, but that maybe it's fungi driven rather than.
That's an excellent point, and I cannot speak to the motivations of the fungi. So I will have to leave that to the fungi themselves to answer that particular question. just to recap the communication concept. Plants in general, they communicate with this underground network that we've just been talking about. They also have compounds in the air. They release chemicals in the air to communicate. They have electrical signaling, just like, kind of like humans have. And then they do the photoreception with the light. So those are the main methods that they have happening. One of the things with this network that is fascinating to me is how plants can make friends, recognize their family, and also their enemies. And a couple examples I will give here real quick. There are many, many plants that make protective chemicals when they start getting chewed on. One of my favorite examples is in Africa, the acacia trees. Somebody figured this out because they were watching the giraffes, and the giraffes would start munching on this copse of trees, and then they would stop, and then they would move to another one that's like 100 yards away, instead of eating what was right in front of them. And they're like, wonder why that is. Well, it turns out that as the giraffe starts chewing on this tree, these trees are putting off a pheromone warning to the other trees that say, hey, we're being eaten, we're being threatened here. And so all the trees in that copse start to create these chemicals to make their leaves bitter and less tasty. And so the giraffes move on. Now these are airborne, and over time the giraffes have learned that they go upwind. So, because the chemicals, don't reach the trees over there if the wind's blowing this way. So they've smartened that out. But anyways, the concept of the pheromone signaling is the same, and there are lots and lots of plants that communicate in that fashion. One of the things that I like is subterfuge and trickery. There are orchids that will mimic a female pheromone to attract their male pollinator, so they don't actually have to make nectar. They're putting out a fake ad with this pheromone, and it works. So they don't have to bother expending the plant energy to make nectar. They can just make the pheromone instead. Here's something that I think is super cool. Plants will call for reinforcements from other kinds of animals. There are species of elm and pine and corn and cotton and tobacco that we have all witnessed when they are being attacked by certain caterpillars. They will emit this compound that summons parasitic wasps that lay their eggs and kill the caterpillars over time. And this has been shown to prevent 50% of the leaf damage over time. So can you imagine, you got a corn plant that a hornworm starts chawing on, and the corn plant puts out this warning pheromone, and the wasps are like, that's their buffet. And so they go and they parasitize the wasp. Talk about a great, amazing connected system. Really fascinating. Questions about that? The last little summary, I just wanted to touch again on more decision making. Plants have been shown to actively navigate towards patches in the soil that are richer in nutrients and where they are avoiding certain toxic substances in areas in the soil. So the roots have a sensing system underground where they're not evenly distributed. They seek out the highest quality soil or the least damaging soil if they're in a poisoned area. And the plants apparently can recognize their own species also. You may have witnessed that when you look at trees. If you have two different species of trees growing next to each other, they're arguing back and forth, trying to shade each other out. But if they're two of the same species, they will often grow apart and give each other room for life. It's a neat cooperation versus competition. Given all these way too many words that I have spoken tonight, and I do appreciate your patience, I think we can all agree that plants possess what we would call intelligence. And I'm gonna use an example of an intelligent human behavior. I'm gonna make a phone call. I'm gonna call Richard on the phone. That's a very smart thing to do. So let's walk through the steps. First, I have a visual stimulus. I see something on my calendar. Oh yeah, I gotta call Richard. We've talked about how plants use visual stimulus and light sensing to make these kinds of decisions. Then I have to remember how to use the phone, and I need to push the right numbers. And we've discussed how counting and numbers involve memory. So in order for me to know where to punch the buttons, I have to remember what to do. And plants can remember things and what to do also. We have guided movement. I look at the phone, I put my finger in the right place, and we talked about how plants have movement and between growing through light or doing the Venus flytrap thing, even though they are stuck to the ground, there is also a lot of movement in plants' behavior. And lastly, we have the communication. When I am speaking to Richard on the phone, I'm using voice and communicating over the electronic network. The plants, as we have just talked about, are communicating via pheromones and other signaling in their network underground. Cool comparison? I thought so too. So I have terrible news. Now is the homework time, because you don't get to just sit there and listen. You have to do a little bit of work. So here is what I would like to do. I would like to split up everybody into 4 working groups. And here's how we're going to do it for ease. We're going to have one group, this table, and my new friend Donna. All right, you're going to be here with them. And then the rest of the folks on this side of the room are going to be in group 2. And then this 1, 2, 3 rows of tables will be group 3, and you folks there will be group 4. So, scoot your chairs around so you can hear each other talk, because there's going to be a brief discussion. It'll take a few minutes. Here are the questions that you have. I'm going to skip this slide because I've been talking too much. All right, group 1, put your hands up, group 1. Fantastic, everyone knows who they are. All right, you're going to pick one of these 2 questions. Number 1, how does or would considering plants as conscious beings affect your behavior and your treatment of vegetation? Or, if you like the other question, what does the Wood Wide Web teach us about presence and cooperation versus dominance and separation? Decide which topic you want to talk about. Talk amongst yourselves. We're going to go about 10 minutes to discuss things. Somebody appoint themselves the note taker and speaker, please, because when we are finished, somebody's going to stand up and tell us what you've decided and what you want to talk about, okay? Group number 2, put your hands up. Group number 2 is not enthusiastic about having homework on Wednesday night. Your questions, one or these 2. Number 1 question for you is, what do you do or what can you do to become involved in the sacred reciprocity of caretaking? Another question option would be, ecosystems are beginning to be granted legal personhood and sovereignty. If you were to make a list of these best practices for interaction with plants as sovereign conscious beings, what would you suggest or require? Group 3? Put your hands up, group 3. That's you. No, you guys are 4. See, I knew someone was going to have the wrong group. You guys, yes, there's rows 1, 2, and 3 are group 3. Your question, you don't get a choice because it's too cool. Your question is, imagine how emerging future technology could be better used to understand and respect plants. And I gave you a couple examples up there. So discuss. Group 4. That's right. Someone's excited. You have questions. 2 choices. What societal changes and practices would occur if all the children were raised in the framework of plants being conscious? Or if you'd rather, the alternate question is, have you witnessed examples of plant sentience, and how did it change your outlook and behavior? pick one of those two questions. Somebody's gonna be the note taker and the speaker. So 10 minutes. At 8:05, we talk.
So that was a very provocative question.
Well, it also depends upon emerging future technology, as we don't understand what that is. So you have to theorize not only what we can run as the plans, but also how we would come to those conclusions.
Okay, friends, our time has expired. Everyone put your pencils down and turn in your exams. Let's begin with group 4. Who's going to be the spokesperson for group 4? You haven't decided who the spokesperson is going to be yet? Decide amongst yourselves. Group 3, who's going to be the spokesperson? Oh, you're 4, I'm sorry. Yeah. Who's going to be the spokesperson? Patricia. Tell us which of the questions you're going to talk about.
We actually thought we would try to answer both, but I think the answer for the first one, probably is closest to my heart and maybe to the rest of us. Sure, if kids were raised where plants were conscious, you know this would really look different in here today, wouldn't it? And I know those of you who have been naturalists and you've introduced kids to the woods, you've really seen what a change it can make in their outlook. All right, I think children, which will become adults at some point, would definitely be more respectful of plants. They would definitely be more grateful. And possibly they would slow down. We asked them to look around and visit with a plant. Suppose they visited with a plant in their classrooms or had a favorite tree outside that they all went out and hugged on a daily basis. Would be nice, but maybe every week. The other thing is the asking permission. I think it would be great if we could have kids learn how to ask permission if they want to eat a plant. Say, is it all right that I take you to eat? Some kind of communication to acknowledge that the plant is within itself. And permission is always wonderful. I truly believe in my heart that plants are spiritual. It's pretty much like everything on the natural world. Maybe us humans too. And anything, anybody want to add? Oh, in 2010, the Environmental Education Association plus some other state agencies passed, got the state legislature in Tennessee to pass the Tennessee Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. And there was at least a dozen items there. And one of them, they were, to walk in the woods, to climb a tree, to play in a creek, to spend the night under the stars, to fly a kite, to grow a vegetable. And I know there were more, but the state legislature passed it, I think, unanimously. And anyway, we have good intentions as educators to get kids out there, structure of our education systems, really challenge that intention and opportunity. And I think each of us could say that kids ought to be outdoors, right? All right, is that enough
Thank you. So, respect, gratitude, and slow down. That's pretty good advice for just about everything. Nicely done, guys. Okay, group 3, who's going to be the spokesperson for group 3? Dr. Pearl.
Paul.
I'm still dying in 2020. So, that's when I retired. So the doctor probably.
Speaking to the microphone, please,
You get the
sir.
microphone, yes, sir. Okay, so here we are trying to figure out what in the world we would do, and we figured we're already apparently being able to tap into electrical signals from trees to create music in forests. So is there some way of trying to take those signals that plants are making, get enough of them, get enough of them and introduce them into an artificial intelligence that might help us to make sense of what they're saying. Richard suggested that it'd be kind of fun sometime to take a tree from Wisconsin in June or July and bring it to Tennessee in June or July and figure out what his experience is like. And if we can get to that point where we can understand if there's some way that we can mimic that in our own behaviors for walking in the forest, and perhaps create some sense in which we might be able to understand and better respect plants because we can actually communicate with them. We know right now already that there are lots of microsensors being used in farm fields to monitor what's going on and make sure that plants get treated well without being treated like their neighbor who doesn't have nearly as much drop need as they have or doesn't have pest presence like this one does. And so rather than just spray the whole area, we try to treat them a little bit differently already. All right. Anything else?
So, using technology to learn how to speak forest.
That's right.
That's fantastic.
Why not?
Well done.
I mean, I can put a bud in, put a little earbud in, and you can hear every language. treated
Yeah,
that you hear.
that's fantastic. Good job, Kat. All right. Group one, which, you're two. You're one.
Who's got me?
Group one.
Oh, all right, great.
Group one, I'm looking right at you. Who's going to be
Okay.
your spokesperson? All right. Which question did you pick?
We chose 1A, how does or would considering plants as conscious beings affect your behavior and treatment of vegetation? And it kind of flowed through a lot of things, beginning with being more.
Speaking to the microphone, please.
It kind of flowed through a lot of connected things, like being more conscientious, planting the things we buy within a week or two instead of months or longer. I have to mediate my guilt because I'm going to destroy the bases and take down green mass to better support natives someday, somehow. And that led to a conversation of giving acknowledgement. I don't know if they did sense it or not, but to perhaps use our perception and the way we communicate to help treat them as conscious. And people in a word cloud said, oh, and then it went to, wait, they're just trying to survive. We're all trying to survive. So maybe there's less emotion and more just instinct involved. Like we're over-anthropomorphizing them as we learn more about their ability to perceive and communicate stuff. What did I look out? So it brought up things like guilt, survival, mindfulness, discerning the meaning of these perceptions and how far we go. Like, what does it mean consciousness? Because these reactions occur. Awareness, being more observant, being more conscientious, and concentrating on perception are the way this information affects us.
So, if plants, what you're saying is if plants have a consciousness, then it really changes your perception and interaction of how you are doing things such as removing invasives or eating a salad.
Providing care.
Providing care, exactly. Good points. Much food for thought. You see why I did this? Group two, all the serious people are in group two. Who is going to be your spokesperson?
Hi, I'm the spokesperson. We had, despite our outward deadpan expression. We were actually very creative, animated idea coming up with. And so we had question number 2, and we did the second one, and we made a list of best practices for interaction with plants as sovereign, conscious beings. And so here are some of the lists. We would require property rights for native plants. We would protect tree canopy and give them priority to mother trees for protection. We would give plants health insurance. And we would outlaw certain pesticides. And we would put safeguards in for agriculture plants in the same way we have safeguards for livestock. We would incorporate plant consciousness into education of children. We would, let's see, we would use awareness and honor the plants before removing them, and create sanctuaries for removed plants, I guess. We remove them, put them somewhere else where they would still live. And then finally, we just talked about how the Supreme Court, sort of that case where they were issued human status for corporations, we would also grant plants the same type of consideration and expressing their desires when it comes to public policy decision making. And that's what we came up with.
That is a fantastic list. Wow. Well done. Foster home for plants. I like that idea. I didn't thought of that one. That's really good. Yes, Paul.
One from the chat.
Question from the chat.
Not a question, just a statement.
Statement from the chat.
Karen McIntyre really well. And Karen just weighed in to remind us that the National Children's Bill of Rights was written by children who experienced the Young Naturalist program in Warren Parks. And so this is not a bunch of adults. These are kids who decided these are things that we need to be able to do. And as she reminds us, we're not doing them, so we need to push Parks and MNPS to be able to incorporate the Children's Bill of Rights in their education.
Thank you for that, Karen. Nice. So in closing, I want to throw out a couple more examples of plants being purposeful and intentional about their behavior. So, good old-fashioned pea pods, Pisum sativum, learns to associate, basically through Pavlovian learning, to associate wind from a fan with light. And so they would teach the plant to go towards the light and the wind, and then it turns out when the light was no longer there, they still went towards the wind, no matter which direction it was. So the plants learned in a Pavlovian fashion too. Now, Hans Willi, I know you're probably going to tell me that Galliano's research was not able to be duplicated after the original 2016 publication. So there's a question mark about that. I got you. I hear you, brother. I know. So witchweed is a parasitic plant in Africa and Asia, and it's a real problem for farmers because basically what it does is it parasitizes a lot of grains, almost to the point of complete destruction, like up to 80% of the crops can be lost from this particular parasitic plant. So they studied it in detail to try to figure out how to fool it, because witchweed sits and waits until the plants start to get phosphorus stressed in the soil around them. Now you would think, why would you wait for a problem to parasitize a plant? Well, it turns out that because of this mycorrhizal network that we talked about, when the soil starts to get phosphorus stressed, the fungi turn on the absorption, and they end up filling up the tanks, and that's the buffet for the witchweed. So they will wait sometimes for years in dormancy until they get the signal from the host plant that they are phosphorus stressed, and then they germinate within a couple days and start to feast. This is my favorite, and this is the last one I want to talk about today. Leaf mimicking vine, Bocchila trifoliolata. This is a chameleon plant, and whatever you put it near, it starts to grow to look exactly like it. It changes the leaf morphology and the color to match where it is, what it's next to. This even works with multiple plants. You know, the same organism will morph itself in 3 different ways depending on what it's near, and it even works with fake plants. So that's a clever mofo right there. So the idea of plant consciousness, yes, we have intelligence. I think we can all agree that this is intelligent behavior. Decision making, you take in all this information from your environment, you remember things, you make decisions, that's intelligence. We can all agree on that. But is it consciousness? That is the big question. And I love that you guys brought up a lot of that in your group conversations, because that is what people are arguing about right now. The evidence for plants make decisions, they learn and they remember things just like animals do. They have this social network, they can recognize their relatives and their friends, they anticipate what might happen. So that sounds like a very engaged, conscious organism. On the other hand, the naysayers will say that, hey, there's no centralized processing system. This is, they don't have the brains and the neurons and the synapses that animals have. The responses are all deterministic. This hormone turns on this thing, and that's why they do it. There's no forethought or there's no deliberation about it. I have a question about that, given what we've talked. But anyways, so according to some, we do not have any specific evidence of a subjective experience or an emotional response. So therefore, they should not be considered conscious beings. My opinion, if you are interested, that's why you brought me in, maybe, is this. And it's very complicated. So listen closely. Who cares what you call it? Right? If you want to slap the conscious label on these organisms, fine. If you decide, no, we're not going to use that word, fine. It doesn't matter, because the plants don't give a damn what English word we put on, what label we have. They're going to do their thing. They're going to do all of their interactions and all their decision making and all of this. So it doesn't, in my opinion, it makes not one lick of difference whether we decide to use a particular word to label it or not. What say you all? Hear, hear. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everybody for coming. Good to have you here. Next month we're going to have Claire Wainwright, a July meeting. She's newly in the Park Division of Natural Areas.